Welcome back to Love TV, Super Grand Parenting Special, where we will explore the difference between positive relating and negative relating. And we will explore, most importantly, how genuinely connecting with others and caring for others is the best thing you can do for your health, body, and brain, especially when you do it with your children.
But mammals give birth to live, helpless animals that need quite sophisticated care if they're going to survive. So that a parent mammal has to be able to discern if the infant is hungry or tired or cold or thirsty or what it needs, and provide for those specific needs, or the infant will die. So mammals evolve parts of their brains that are oriented specifically towards sensing signals that come from another mammal, interpreting them, and feeling disposed to care for the needs that are sensed there.
So this is more than simple emotion. This is more than happiness or sadness. This is a part of us that is hardwired to understand how the other person is feeling. And
we get a direct sensory experience, actually, of the insides of another person's brain, which is quite remarkable if you think about it. But if you and I knew each other well, I could sense what's going on in your brain.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
Are you my girl? Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
And that while we all have the capacity to be compassionate, that we sometimes resort to harmful strategies when we don't see a better way to get our needs met. And as I'm studying this and I'm learning about it, I come across the term unconditional positive regard. And this is a term made popular by the psychologist Carl Rogers. And he defined it as accepting and supporting a person regardless of what they have said or done. Accepting or supporting a person regardless of what they have done. And I think that's it. That's what I want to give my kids. I want to stay in a space where no matter what they do, I can accept and support them. And I realized this is what they're doing at the nursery school that I'm watching. When there's a conflict between two kids, even when one child's been hurt, they walk up, they create safety, and then they listen to the kids, and they talk, and they problem solve with them about a way to figure out what to do. And there's no punishment, and no one's a bad kid, and there's no judgment, and they hold this space. And I think, you know what, this is it. This is what I'm gonna do. I write it in big letters, and I put it on our refrigerator. And I let my husband know, here's where we're at. Unconditional positive regard, okay? We're gonna wake up every day, and this is where we're going. This is what we're gonna give the kids, okay? So I'm learning, and I'm gathering tools, and I'm able to stay in this space more often. But what I realize is that I can't do it all the time. And when I digress and I use a strategy like threatening or shaming, I am really critical of myself. And I find myself thinking things like, you know what? I should just go back to work full time. I should go back to the hospital and I should hire a nice nanny who can come and be with the kids and just be kind. And it's important to know that I left a career that I loved because I wanted more to be at home with my kids. But when I found myself wanting to put this parenting philosophy into action and not being able to do it, these were the thoughts that I would have in my head. Then I had the fortune of going to a conference where I had the chance to hear Carol Dweck speak. She's a Stanford psychologist that developed the theory of mindset. And she developed a theory to describe how people view their most basic attributes. And she describes a fixed versus a growth mindset. And in a fixed mindset, people view their most basic abilities, like their intelligence and their talents, as fixed traits. You either have them or you don't, and you constantly need to prove that you have it if you want it. And people with a growth mindset, they believe that they can cultivate their most basic abilities, like their intelligence and talent. And they are open to challenges because they see them as a place to grow. And they're willing to make mistakes and to be vulnerable. And as I heard her speaking, I realized I had a completely fixed mindset for how I looked at myself, especially my intelligence. I actually grew up thinking I was pretty smart, and that when I wanted to learn something, I just did it and I applied it. I had a lot of degrees by this point. But here I was learning this parenting philosophy that felt so critically important to me, and I couldn't even seem to put it into action in my own house. So what did this mean? So in my head, either I was emotionally stupid or I was just mean. And that's the way that I was looking at it. And then it dawned on me. I was waking up every day wanting to give my kids unconditional positive regard, and I didn't begin to have it for myself. My positive regard was completely conditional. It had a checklist. And it was based upon my performance. When I parented in the way that I thought was great, I was really pretty happy with myself and quite supportive. But when I digressed and I used a strategy that I wasn't proud of, I was super critical and I got derailed. And I realized that when I was busy criticizing myself, I wasn't able to stay present and unconditional with the kids. When I was busy criticizing myself, I'd think, you know what? This whole empathy-led parenting thing, it's crap. If I was just using punishments and rewards, at least I would be in control. Right? And then I would start blaming the kids for everything, or my husband, or if you were in my radius, it was your fault. Because I didn't want it to be my fault. I didn't want to be a bad person. I needed it to be someone else's fault. And then I started to think, in the big picture here, I'm never going to be able to give my kids unconditional positive regard until I can give it to myself. And then the question becomes, how do I give myself something that I just don't have? I don't feel it. How am I going to do this?
Pretty wide-held conventional wisdoms. I mean, among them, and for me, one of the most shocking was the fact that you were found through your research that mothers who suffered depression were 4 times more likely to have children who experienced sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, and that in fact the incidence of SIDS is higher than in America than anywhere else. What is the linkage you're trying to develop here?
Well, SIDS has been a mystery for a long time, and of course usually parents put the child to bed and then the child dies with no apparent cause. And one of the really cutting-edge lines of thought that's evolving about sudden infant death is that in light of what we're talking about, say, people establishing these vital regulatory ties, it's especially vital between parents and infants who are fragile, actually, and probably have the most vulnerable bodies and minds and brains imaginable. And that what sudden infant death may represent is a failure of that regulatory process, that the infant is not getting enough regulation from a parent, and its own cardiorespiratory brain rhythms can't be sustained on its own, and they collapse and the infant dies. And there's some fascinating research done by James McKenna, a sleep scientist at Notre Dame, who studied infants and children, infants and mothers sleeping together, and he was the first person actually to study this. And he found that their sleep rhythms are intertwined during the night, that they're each regulating each other's sleep level. And the hypothesis is that if you take infants out of that communal context of sleep, you may be depriving them of a vital physiologic influence they need to stay alive during the night.
Well, and that in fact the higher incidence of SIDS may reflect the cultural bias against parents sleeping with children.
It may, because one of the puzzles of SIDS is that its incidence varies so widely in the world. The United States has the highest rate in the world, 2 per 1,000 live births. Some countries have rates that are 10 or 100 times lower. And so the question is, what is that cultural factor in this country that is putting our children at risk? And one of the ideas that we're raising in the book is it could well be that our culture discourages close contact between infant and parent, particularly at night.
Now, this also has fairly widespread implications. If how a child is loved during childhood, and especially the proximity between the child and the parent, the mother in this particular instance, it directly affects both their health and how they love in the future. Are we to conclude, therefore, stay-at-home parenting is better for a child, better for society, than two parents working?
So there was more to the mindset story. Carol Dweck started talking about studies that they did to try to see if they could help students change their mindset. So they took a group of 7th graders that had declining math grades, and they split them into 2 groups. And one group, they taught study skills. And the second group, they taught study skills along with training in the growth mindset. So what these students learned was that their brain was like a muscle. And the more that they used it, the stronger that it grew. And that with challenge, they could stretch themselves and literally grow new neural connections in their brain. And that with time, they could become smarter. And what they found was that the students that they just gave the study skills, their grades continued to decline. But the students that got the study skills plus the training and the growth mindset had marked improvement in their grades. And further researchers found that it wasn't just marked improvement in their grades, they enjoyed school more, and they became more engaged. And she described a boy who came up all excited after learning about the growth mindset and said to her, "You mean I don't have to be dumb?" And I heard her say this, and I thought, if these students can learn to see themselves differently, their most basic abilities, their intelligence, then I can apply this and learn to see myself differently. I can apply this to my parenting struggle. And so I started to appreciate the enormity of the task of trying to rewire my brain's response to big feelings and fear and conflict. And I started a process of daily non-judgmental reflection. And what I would do, and this started after the fact, because in the moment of conflict, I had no skills to do it. So what I started doing was in the morning, I would set aside a little time before the day started, and I would get up and I would write. And I would think about every judgmental thought I had about myself from the day before, and I would write it down. So for example, I'm a bad parent because I resorted to using threats again. And then I would ask myself, could I look at this non-judgmentally and describe what happened, and then think about what I was feeling and needing? So I'd take that statement and I would change it to, okay, when we're running late and I'm stressed and I'm overwhelmed, I tend to resort to threats. And even though that meets my need for immediate compliance with the kids in the moment, sometimes, it doesn't actually meet my longer-term goals of being in this relationship with mutual respect and shared decision-making. So how could I support myself better? And the next column, I would write about what I would do the next time I was in the situation that would support me or the girls better. And I would go to the next thought. I'm selfish because of this. And then I would say, what actually happened? I was tired and at my wit's end and had no more to give, okay? And I started reframing everything. And as I did this process, and I would go through for that day until there were no judgmental thoughts left. And as I started doing this and I started reframing these thoughts for myself, I started to realize that I could actually do it in the moment. And I had an experience one day with my daughter who was really upset with me. And she had been crying and screaming for some time, and I was just trying to stay present and be with her. And she looked at me and she said, "I'm going to call the police, and they're going to come and take you away." And I said, "You think they're going to take me away?" And she said, eyes all big, "Are you saying the police would take me?" And I said, "You're the one who's screaming." And she was crushed. She was crushed, and she was terrified. And in that moment, I knew it was not what I wanted to be doing. And I tried to start backpedaling. Like, they're not really going to take you. I'm just frustrated. And she looked at me and she said, Mom, you just told me that the police would come and take me? What kind of a mom does that? And I said, she's right. What kind of a mom does that? A really crappy mom. And I started to go down that road of criticism and self-judgment. I was like, I'm not going to be able to come back from this one. This is so crappy. And as I started to go there, I realized I was losing my presence with her. And I was going to start blaming her for how loud she'd been and how long she'd been crying. And then I said to myself, no, slow down, Michelle. You can see this differently. Like, what kind of a mom does that? A mom that's really stressed and decides she wants peace and ease over everything else. A mom that's scared. I realized that when she said police, I thought, you know what? She's been screaming for so long, so loud, it sounds like I'm torturing her. What if one of the neighbors actually calls the police? And in that moment, I was afraid. And as I started to step back and try to understand what was happening for both of us, I said, I don't have to go down that road. I can actually choose another road. I'm going to stay present for both of us. And I sat down with her and I apologized. And I told her I knew it must have been really scary to hear me say that. But I stayed with her and I listened. And I didn't abandon myself. And after that, I started to see a fork in the road in all of my challenging situations. As soon as I started to see that I was going to go to a place of judgment and criticism, like, oh, I can't believe I've done this, I would start losing my center and I would think, Michelle, slow down. You don't have to go there. You can see this a different way. I can choose to offer myself acceptance and support no matter what I've done. And even if I've done something that's really hurtful, I can stop and I can repair and I can actually say sorry and I can come back to center. You see, before I started this process of non-judgmental reflection, I was really struggling to believe that our natural state is one of compassion because I didn't believe it to be true for myself.
There's no question, actually, that stay-at-home parenting is better for children. Now, the real question is how much better? Is it so much better that parents should do that? Or is it so much better that we should make a big effort to revamp our society? Mm-hmm. And the evidence is mounting that because the parent and child have this regulatory relationship along this brain pathway, the parent is actually regulating the development of a child's growing brain. Mm-hmm. Because the child's brain is growing by tremendous leaps and bounds, especially in the first couple of years of life. And that during this vital period of brain growth, normal development of the brain depends on that special biological connection with the parent's brain. If we interfere with that and don't allow children enough exposure, we could be depriving them of something which helps make their brain turn out the healthiest.
Can daycare be a surrogate for parental love in that respect, do you think?
Probably not, actually. Most daycare, as it's conducted, is of the impersonal variety. Mm-hmm. The children are cared for by a rotating series of impersonal caretakers, that there's a lot of staff turnover, there's very little personal interaction between the infants or the children and the staff. And these are really conditions that are hostile to the biological needs for connectedness that children have. So institutional kinds of daycare, because of the element of impersonality that they necessarily inject into a child's life, are hostile to those needs. Now, and again, the real question is, how hostile are they? How many hours of impersonal daycare can a child sustain before the mind is at risk?
Right. Now, some of this directly challenges early childhood development theory. I mean, part supports to the extent that there's no question that relations between parents and child, have a major part in forming the brain in that crucial 0 to 3, 0 to 5. But this also suggests, unlike early childhood development theory that says everything's finished, you're fully formed, that this isn't the case at all, that our evolution as human beings, the state of our brain is ever changing and evolving and conditioned based on who we love.
Exactly. And the more we learn about the brain, the more we learn about how changeable it actually is. So there's more and more reason to think that it's changeable. Just in the past year, we used to think that the number of cells in the brain was fixed and you couldn't get any new ones. Mm-hmm. Now we know that the brain adds thousands of new cells every day. So it's clear that the brain does change on an ongoing basis, and that our relationships are a vital part of what makes it change, and makes it change in certain directions. And that occurs across the lifespan right up until the day we die.
They're going to help us. You can read all you want about having a better love life, and it's not going to work. Is that right?
That's very true. Reading and getting self-help advice all impacts the thinking brain, but it doesn't impact the emotional brain very much at all. And really what impacts the emotional brain is the experience of relatedness, or the experience of being with somebody. So that's actually what changes people. And self-help advice, as well-meaning as it's intended to be, and even if it's very good advice, is not going to change anybody in a lasting way.
And if you don't know, now you know.